This sprawling plant is known as Rhipsalis pentaptera, and pentaptera generally means 5, so penta, and terra means winged. And I do believe that just means about this stem, because it looks like a winged stem, and if you do kind of trace around the stem, you will see that it has kind of 5 different grooves within it. Now, this is a type of jungle cactus, and when you think of cactus, you think of like, oh, maybe a spiny, thorny, prickly thing that you would find in the desert. But this is actually not growing in the desert. This is growing in the rainforests of Brazil, which is super cool. And when you think of rainforest, you think of like a really wet condition, but that's not always the case because these are epiphytic cacti. So they are actually growing in trees, which means that sometimes they don't get a tremendous amount of water. They actually do go through some drying periods because they are protected by the canopy of the trees, and they have to rely on whatever water actually comes through the precipitation or some of the moisture in the air. So these particular plants like actually a little bit more humidity. They're not going to suffer if you don't give them a tremendous amount of humidity, but they would prefer something in the moderate to high humidity range. Although in some cases I have them in low humidity and they haven't seemed to have any issue, but that's because I'm watering them just a little bit more. Now, what's also great about these particular plants is that they don't mind being in a little less light than typical, which is great because for those of us who are living in kind of like apartment or homes with not a lot of light, this is actually a very good option for you, especially if you want a cactus. I would say that you'd have to go with more of a jungle cactus because they're used to being underneath the kind of the forest canopy, so they're getting a little bit more like dappled light conditions, a little bit more partial shade, and so I have these particularly pulled away from my southwest facing window. I would say, gosh, they're probably like 5 or 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet away because they're growing underneath my green wall. So they are getting a little bit more ambient light and they get some of that late afternoon light, but it's like that kind of like orange golden hour glow light. So it's a little cooler because it's a little bit further into the room and not directly up against the window, which I wouldn't typically put Rhipsalis up against the window. I have had in the past, and I think as long as you're watering them enough, then they should actually be fine. But this one I don't water all that often. I would say once a week, and I have it in a very kind of like, I would say woody, barky, perlite type of mix because again, these plants don't like to have their roots too wet. They do like to retain a little bit more moisture compared to some other epiphytic species, but not too much that they could actually rot away. Now, if you don't water this enough, it will start to pucker a little bit. This one a little less so because it is typically a little bit more succulent than some of the other Rhipsalis that I might be showing you, but you still have to be a little bit more mindful and water it when it needs a little bit more water. Now, another thing that you might be able to see is the fact that they have these little teeny weeny flowers right here. And it's typical that these will flower usually, I would say, from the winter into the early spring. And I would say that May is usually the latest when they flower. And then they actually get these like little berries, and mostly all Rhipsalis get these little berries, and sometimes they range from like either white or like reddish or pink or fuchsia or black depending on the particular species. Anyway, I've gone like kind of Rhipsalis gaga over the last like 3 years, so I've been acquiring quite a lot of them and I really enjoy growing these. I think they're a relatively low maintenance plant to have, and I've actually had no pest pressures across any of my Rhipsalis, which is a really good sign. So if you want something that's a little bit more of a low-key plant and you don't have a tremendous amount of light in your house, then you may just want to try Rhipsalis.